I'd like to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us today. My name is Scott Jakovich. I'm with the California LTAP. We are pleased to bring you today's hot off the grill lunch and learn special on succession planning. This is the first of a two-part series, so we're hopeful that you'll be back again next Tuesday for the exciting conclusion. A couple of quick housekeeping tips before we get started. Um, Mic's off until you're called upon. We do want to make this as interactive as possible, so we encourage you to raise your hands and come on mic and ask questions or share experiences. We'll be using both the Zoom chat and Q&A features. If you have questions, a raised hand, drop something in the chat or drop something in the Q&A box. We're keeping an eye on everything in order to answer your questions. These controls are all available at the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Today's presentation is being recorded and will become available on our YouTube channel in just a couple of days. Uh, I'll be dropping a copy of today's presentation in the chat box at the end of the webinar as a PDF so that you have that. We'll also be posting it as part of our regular email updates. I'll drop links in these for all these things once we get going. And finally, I'd like to introduce you to our two presenters today, Tom O'Brien, who's also from the California LTAP, and our partner Daniel Burke from the Caltrans Division of Local Assistance. Guys?
Thank you, Scott. And thank you all for joining us today. I'm so thrilled to see the range of regions and positions represented, which will make, I think, for a more interesting and a richer discussion. As Scott said, my name is Tom O'Brien. I serve as the director of the California Local Technical Assistance Program Center. I also serve as the associate dean in the College of Professional and Continuing Education at California State University, Long Beach, where I focus on a wide range of workforce development topics, with a particular focus on transportation, which brings us to the topic at hand today, which, as Scott said, is part one of a two-part series. Today we're going to be talking about planning for succession planning, and next week we'll be talking about implementing succession planning. This is a topic that is increasingly important to any and all organizations, given changing demographics, changing skill sets, including the expected need for new employees and incumbent employees to be conversant in things like AI. And it's particularly critical, though, for public agencies, including local governments and state departments of transportation, which also have particular needs with regard to recruitment and retaining talent, particularly when it comes to potential competition from not only other public agencies, but the private sector as well. Today and next week, we're also going to be highlighting some work that we did here at California State University, Long Beach, partially funded under a grant prior to 2024, funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation under the University Transportation Center program as part of the Pacific Southwest Region University Transportation Center. And this is a research report that looked at developing succession planning capacity within Caltrans as a state DOT. And we're going to draw upon lessons from that today and next week, but we hope that the discussion will be broadened beyond one particular state agency or the public sector as a whole. We want to think about succession planning and its value to any and all organizations, as I said. With that, I want to turn it over to Daniel Burke to introduce himself and the role he plays within CALTAP and Caltrans.
Thank you so much, Tom, and big thanks also to Scott Jakovich and Patrick Shivek from the California Local Technical Assistance Program housed at the Cal State Long Beach. And We're also doing this in partnership. Again, myself, I'm Daniel Berg, training supervisor at the Division of Local Assistance at Caltrans. And we're doing this within partnership with the American Public Works Association. We have a great and strong partnership with these, especially with the Sacramento American Public Works Association, where we work with them to determine the training needs of our local public agencies, consultants, contractors, and transportation stakeholders. And then we go ahead and promulgate and advocate and conduct that training to ensure that our partners and transportation stakeholders have the information they need to comply or just some materials to brush up upon when delivering projects all throughout California. And it's also applicable to some of our neighboring states. I'm not going to forget about you. I saw some individuals from Iowa and Arizona. Welcome aboard. This discussion today, well, it is a discussion. This is not a lecture. We're not going to be lecturing down to you. You can think of this kind of as an upper division undergraduate course or a graduate division course where we're seeking some interaction and we'll be asking some questions, and feel free to put the information into the chat. This is Vegas. It's going to stay here with us. We're not going to be broadcasting it out for public view well, at least with the chat bar. Patrick, if you could please advance us to the next slide. Thank you. So some personal challenges here at Caltrans. This was taken from May 2025. About 44% of all of our employees are 50 and older. That's a pretty intimidating number. About 18% are 60 and older. That 60 represents a pretty critical benchmark because they're very well within 5 years of retirement. So we really need to be considerate of how do we replace the silver tsunami and train up current staff and also recruit new staff to the team, and what tools should we use to do that? What's even scarier than that, or a little more intimidating or frightening, is about 63% of supervisors and managers are 50 and older. 63%, that's a really large number. And about 23% are 60 and older. So they're getting ready to cross the threshold and begin their new chapter of their life away from work at Caltrans. So here's a part where I'd like for everybody to please feel free and drop it into the chat. And we're just going to tackle the first half of the question here. Does this resemble your organization? Do you have your demographics aging towards retirement or threatening to, similar to Caltrans? Thank you, Corey. Very similar.
And with regard to transportation, while people are typing in, I've seen data that suggests that the problem is even more acute in public transit, for example.
Wow. Well, hopefully we'll have a few more individuals who will respond and participate with us to discuss these items. That'd be excellent. But let's now ask the very much here at Department of Public Works. Thank you, Ralph. So let's now ask the next question. And what best practices can your organizations implement to succession plan? And a few more came in as well. So there's a couple that said, Jillian says hers is a little bit lower. Demographics have changed over the last 5 years. That's excellent. We're going to get to that, how the demographics change. Oh, you're in the same boat as us, Amy. Thank you. Close to the same for supervisors and team leaders. Let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. I'm going to pass things off to Tom here.
Yeah, so recognizing the challenge and the problem is the first step, right, as they say. We want to talk a little bit about what you do once you have that knowledge. And while I think organizations recognize the need to do succession planning, not a lot of organizations, at least state DOTs, have undertaken formal succession planning exercise and fully integrated it into the culture of the organization. One of the things that's a good place to start is developing a benchmark to understand what your competition is doing, particularly those organizations that you think work most effectively, how succession planning is structured within the organization, where does it sit, how much resource is devoted to it, and what resources are required. And in particular, with regard to public organizations, where you might have employees subject to collective bargaining agreements, to what extent are there models out there that demonstrate the ability to develop talent within organizations and within classification sometimes, and then opportunities to move people outside of classification to advance? And one of the things that we're going to be talking about as we go forward is the value of connecting with peer institutions. And here's a little bit of the punchline. We're going to be sharing some findings from peer exchanges that we did with DOTs in places like Michigan, Montana, Colorado, and Arizona. So we're glad to see Arizona here. And some of the challenges observed that reinforce what Daniel just shared before, right, is that our institutions and organizations compete with each other for talent. So sometimes it's not an issue of workforce shortage, but workforce churn, so that there's turnover between organizations. And that strategies such as transitional training are difficult to implement on a regular basis. And transitional training refers to the fact that you identify when people are likely to retire, give them the freedom and the tools to be able to, and the level of comfort to work with you on identifying a retirement date and using that time effectively to plan for replacement for that position or modification as needed. And as I said, those bureaucratic hurdles also need to be addressed, whether they come in the form of sort of the challenges of classification, limited resources for hiring, or access to data to understand the problem in the first place. Next slide, please. And that gets us back to the report and how we got here. Caltrans asked us at the university to sort of look at what it could be doing with succession planning by starting with an assessment of its existing resources related to succession planning, knowledge management, and workforce development. And we wanted to look at this through the lens of the DOT and the public sector to be able to assess and anticipate the impact of generational shifts and how a large state DOT, which may not be as nimble as other organizations, is able to respond to it. We wanted to look at Caltrans in particular because of the size of the organization. Danny, you can correct me. I think it's an organization of 15,000 to 20,000 people spread out across the state of California. And so while the need to deploy succession planning tools across the state is well accepted, it's a bit more problematic to actually deploy those tools when you have large organizations themselves that exist at the district level and that the districts themselves look very different than headquarters. We mentioned the loss of talent to the private sector. And also, I would argue that the challenge in succession planning within a state DOT is made more challenging by the changing expectations for what DOTs and public agencies do. Moving beyond simply development of infrastructure and maintenance of infrastructure. In some cases, you have agencies, transportation agencies that are also operating agencies. And the expectation of the customer or client, in this case, the residents of the state, to be able to access information at any given time changes what the demand for the workforce within the DOT is. So we, as part of this, and with that as background, we did a national scan of state DOTs looking at existing strategies used by them to address succession planning. We also wanted to look at a 2012 document that was produced by Caltrans called the Knowledge Transfer Guidebook to see to what extent it was being used a decade later, if at all, and to what extent Caltrans' approach to knowledge management, that how that connected to succession planning, if at all. We wanted to assess the success of those strategies, and then out of the research that we did on state DOT practices, we brought together a group from Montana, Michigan, Arizona, and Colorado, which had addressed succession planning in some formal way or another, and also represented the diversity of state DOT structures, transportation systems, and needs to get a sense of where that diversity of opinion might help us. Next slide, please. Just since I mentioned knowledge management, the Knowledge Management Guidebook, I wanted to just mention briefly here how we define those terms. Succession planning focuses on developing people for future roles, and also preparing people or understanding how people who are outside your organization can contribute to the growth of that organization, and so reflects the need to understand how recruitment tools support good succession planning. Knowledge management is, in my view, a component of good succession planning. It focuses on capturing, storing, and transferring information, skills, and expertise within the organization, which in turn makes the job of succession planning a little bit easier. The third term I would add that's not on here, right, is the workforce development piece of this, which is what you do with the knowledge management and succession planning goals to prepare your workforce in a way that responds to the ever-changing needs. And effective organizations use knowledge management to document the expertise of current employees and succession planning to train future employees using that information. What Caltrans laid out in its guidebook were a host of things from boot camps to critical incident reviews. So a good foundation within the organization, but we wanted to better understand how it played out in real time. Next slide. And then one of the things I mentioned, the benchmarking, and there are some good lessons that come out of the report, and I wanted to call out in particular what we learned from the Michigan Department of Transportation, which really incorporated it into its organization, a cultural shift focusing on new standards for leadership. We'll talk about that in a little bit. A constant assessment of roles and responsibilities, a review of talent, knowledge management as a distinct component of succession planning, but one that requires its own resources, and looking at this throughout the entire life cycle of the employee. And some of the things that came out of that is sort of looking at how organizations, where organizations can best invest to get the biggest return on your investment, the 35 to 49-year-old period, which takes people who have developed skills but prepares them for future advancement. Engaging under 35-year-old employees to encourage them to seek and hone their leadership skills once they become more familiar with the organization. And separate, as we said, separating talent management from knowledge management and addressing the two subjects separately. They're combined, but they each need individual attention. Let's stop there for a second and see if I'd be curious if there's any reflections on what we've shared in terms of defining the problem, which is what we've tried to do up till now. As Daniel asked in the first question, whether this resonates with your own organization. And I'd also be curious if you have in mind organizations that you would benchmark against, right? Do you know where to go to sort of look for best practices? And again, feel free if you want to raise your hand and call on you. We'd love to engage you in real time. Don't know if it's is that Jackie or Jacques. Could you explain knowledge management versus talent management? Sure. So knowledge management, right, is how you build and transfer know-how within the organization, right? So how do you make sure that you build institutional knowledge, but that it doesn't rest within the brain of a single person, right? So this is sort of the equivalent of the technology transfer. How is knowledge of process flows within the organization? Best practices, resources, how are they documented and shared so that if you were to lose an employee, how would you be able to build the skill sets of a new person who has to come in without starting from scratch? And then the talent management is the formal, in many ways, the formal training, professional development opportunities that allow that knowledge management to take place. Is it a leadership development program? Is it training within your organization on effective AI prompt engineering, right? So talent management is the process by which you effectuate knowledge management, if that makes sense. Any other comments or questions? And Jacques, I hope that helped. All right, well, we can go on to the next slide, and while Daniel's speaking here, I can monitor, see if there are any other questions or comments.
Thank you, Tom, for discussing the study that was performed. And so there's a need to succession plan and determine who's going to be responsible for that. It's just not going to evolutionize on its own. And the simple answer is everyone. What we appear to see from organizations that run through a top-down hierarchy is the senior executives or the C-suite level executive managers are the champions, meaning they're going to continually support succession planning throughout the organization. Department heads or division chiefs, as we call them here at Caltrans, they're going to be the leaders. They're going to be delegating the responsibilities out to their subordinate managers. They're going to be talking about it at all staff meetings. Your human resource professionals are just that. They're going to be the resources. They're going to be housing all of the knowledge data and tools for everyone to use. They're basically going to be effectively the technical experts. Your employees are going to be the validators, meaning they're going to be the subjects, the majority of the subjects for succession planning. They're going to be implementing it, and you'll be able to tell if you are a supervisor or manager, in this case, a leader or a technical expert, whether it's effective or not. You'll also be able to draw on any changes or trends. As we're aware, as we go from generation to generation, the baby boomers are starting to, a lot of them have retired already. Many would say that they value pay and stability, whereas perhaps the generation after them, Generation X, wants a little more flexibility. And a lot of that flexibility request came through the pandemic. So we'll need to make sure that there's a balance to keep employees motivated and the rationale to continue to grow within your company through succession planning. Next slide, please, Patrick.
Daniel, can I add one comment there?
Absolutely.
One of the benefits of engaging employees in the succession planning process through the identification of needs, of training needs, is that the data will tell you that employees stay longer at companies that invest in career development. So one of the things that it does, that investment, is buys you some time to do succession planning, right? If you're not constantly addressing turnover or churn, or workforce shortages, whatever it might be, looking at professional development as a potential revenue savings and not just a cost function will I think, pay off in return.
Thank you, Tom. So let's hear about the 3 steps for preparing the succession plan. The first step is to develop a risk matrix based on position or similar group. And these are going to be based, of course, on risk. As we saw from the graphics in the second slide of this presentation, we had about 44% of Caltrans staff nearing that retirement age of 50, and it was 18% nearing age 60 or at age 60 or older. So those would be very high risks where we need to go ahead and succession plan. But we also need to identify our needs and priorities. Caltrans's core values are likely in engineering, maintenance, maybe not as much as an administrative position, which I take some offense to. Well, not personally, but we're here to help support those individuals doing the core processes of Caltrans. But those are going to help weigh and help your organizations prioritize how and what areas to implement and focus on, and to develop the plans and then strategies. We're going to also want to, as part of this process, to list the key players to develop the risk matrix and to peer review it and to provide any feedback that's necessary. I might be a little biased to give my position, while others may feel there's other areas that are more important. Perhaps safety engineering is pretty high up. I imagine it is as well. It's Caltrans's and FH, Federal Highway Administration's #1 priority. So you'll want, obviously, caretakers such as human resources to review this document, and also management, as well, as they're the leaders. And Tom, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about key performance indicators.
Yeah, and we've got that in a couple slides down, but I wanted to comment on the fact that the risk matrix applies to both the individual and the organization, right? This example, and there are many like this, and they have a similar look and feel, is designed to help you understand the effectiveness and the potential of the talent that you employ. This is important because with this generation, young employees may enter the workplace with a lot less familiarity of the hire to retire cycle. Coming out of a gig economy, right? The expectation of staying with an organization over the longer term may not be the starting point, and it may become a self-fulfilling prophecy if the employee doesn't see themselves or doesn't see the relationship between performance and advancement and the need for them to invest in their own potential. So identifying and sort of looking at the potential of the individual employee it will pay dividends. And then at the same time, looking at the risk that you as an organization absorb or live with by not developing the right potential. In the report, one of the interesting things that comes out of the Montana case study is the development of their critical role identification model. And their matrix looks at things like urgency of need. What are the tasks for which the success of the organization depends, and what would the impact be of a loss in that skill set or people in that position, right? If there isn't appropriate redundancy to be able to fill the need if someone were to leave the organization, what would that mean for the organization? So what are the positions that are most critical? And that contribute to mission critical steps? And then to what extent do we have an eye toward the availability of internal talent to replace in the short term and to build over the longer term? And where is there external talent that we could rely upon? So in addition to sort of this, looking at how you assess and identify talent within the organization, what are the risks that the organization bears itself based on the mission? Next slide, Daniel.
And Patrick, could you swing over to the spreadsheet, please?
Yep.
Thank you. I've created a sample risk matrix for priorities in planning to succession plan. And this is very simple. Yours might change based on your organizational needs as far as the structure, framework, and using the risk factors. But we have very simply here a job description going from left to right. The needs justification. So how are we justifying our scores? What other notes do we want to add in there? As Tom mentioned, how risk critical is this position? Without design engineers, it would be catastrophic for Caltrans. So in the four factors that I have listed here, I apologize about the numbering's off there a little bit. We mentioned in the second slide again that a big risk to Caltrans is less than or equal to 5 years of retirement. So at that 60 age bracket is where we're estimating. And the scores go from 1 to 10, with 1 being, oh, they're a fairly new employee. It's their first day on the job, to, oh my gosh, they're getting ready to retire. So we see that one's weighted a little bit higher. Then we have critical to core functions, internal pool availability, which means, do you have individuals who would be able to have knowledge passed on to them? And what about being supervisors or managers? And then we have external pool availability too. How specific and defined is the profession that we're looking at here? With maintenance, there's a limited amount of excitement, unfortunately, about the pool. We could also say the same with heavy equipment operations as well, which you'll see is the fourth row down on row 11, and it has a score of 8. So those are pretty high. What we'll do is we'll then factor or multiply all the risk categories together to get us to the total risk. And could just use a function such as sort and filter to find out which one has the most points assessed to it. Again, this is a very simplified look at a risk matrix that will help your organizations make some decisions as far as what areas or what groups or units do you want to focus on. Thank you, Patrick. Let's go back to the slides, please. We can go on to step 2. Thank you. 2 key words you're going to hear me talk about today and mention it quite a bit. In fact, your ears are probably going to get tired of hearing it, are trust and buy-in. We assess morale and culture to make sure that employees will trust what management and the organization is doing. If there is no trust, we can't expect them to buy in, can we? What we've found to be fairly efficient is to use an anonymous survey and make it a requirement of the employees to complete it. It's just a recommendation from the supervisor down. If for some reason the employees are unresponsive, we would also recommend using as an alternate one-on-one meetings to ask what can be improved. What can make work culture ideal for the employee to not dread coming in on Monday mornings? Yeah, sometimes it's a little hard to come in on Monday mornings, but we get somebody excited to do that. We recommend using open-ended questions and to make sure it's captured and we're taking notes of the common phrases and terms that are used there. As a former auditor, open-ended questions usually tells you a little bit more about predetermined answers that you think are correct, but may not be some of the real causes to help improve morale and culture in the organization. So having those bits of data and being able to extract that out is going to assist your organizations quite a bit. And remember again, employees will not buy into succession planning or any concept when morale is low because they don't trust the organization. So again, we need to first raise that morale and culture to build that trust and eventual employee buy-in to the succession plan. Next slide, please. And go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, so in any organizations, it's helpful to quantify those goals as much as possible and document what you want out of that survey or those one-on-one meetings with individuals. And the survey helps gather the baseline for your organization, right? It demonstrates your need. And it's an opportunity, right, to establish goals moving forward. And again, this is critical for both the individual as well as for the organization itself. One of the things that comes out of the work that we did in the research is that too often organizations tie the data gathering, whether it's and mostly on the qualitative side, to the annual performance review, the evaluation, which is a context that may not be designed in particular to build morale. Often the evaluator and the evaluated don't look forward to that engagement, and it's not about looking forward and identifying opportunity. It's about tracking satisfactory performance, which is a low benchmark. And so what some of the organizations have done, including Caltrans, is to look at moving beyond performance review to the development of individual development plans, which are focused on workforce and training opportunities and the identification of need that can be used in the development of some of that talent management that we talked about earlier. It's also an opportunity to look at the employee's position description in new light, and not from the perspective, are you doing everything that's on your checklist, but asking the question is the position description still relevant for the changing workplace, for the introduction of technology that may be affecting your job? So looking at individual development plans is one opportunity. And again, I will go back and say this is something that also came out of the Michigan study as well. For once you've identified the measurables, right, you can work with the individual on seeing how they can build their skill set that in a way that's valuable to them and to the organization. But for the institution, for the organization, for the department, developing those key performance indicators so that they serve as a way to assess your success at meeting the goals on an annual or semi-annual, annual, or multi-year basis. And you institutionalize them by reporting on the data at all levels so people know how the organization is doing. Some of the things that come out of the research that you can track, right? Look at the response to job applications. Are there positions that you're having multiple applicants, multiple well-qualified applicants, or are you having multiple applicants that are not qualified? And if they aren't, what's the case? Do you need to be rethinking what the position description looks like when it's advertised? And what are others doing? Are they advertising degrees, or are they advertising skills, competencies, and knowledge sets? Because that's what the private sector is increasingly doing. You can capture and measure the retention of high potential employees. So if you go through the risk matrix exercise, you identify high potential employees relative to others, what's your success at retaining them 1+ year, 2 years after they've been brought on board? What's your internal promotion rate? Have you successfully built your talent base so that you can hire within. How long does it take you to fill new openings, which is also another measure of the success of the way you're communicating the needs of the organization. One of the tools that we're using at the university now is Lightcast, which is a labor market tool that allows us to look and assess postings, for example, from tools and platforms like Monster.com or Indeed, for us to get a sense of how similar positions are advertised elsewhere. And also, as we build new programs for training, what are the skill sets that employers are demanding beyond degrees? And then, while there's often sometimes not a lot of control about compensation rates in the public sector, in state DOTs, or in my case, in higher education, at least knowing what the market rates are for positions, for similar positions in other states, at other levels of government or in the private sector, allow you to build succession planning with an eye toward overcompensating where you can, the benefits, the work-life balance, whatever you can offer that offsets perhaps the higher wage rate that's offered in the private sector. And also, one other thing that I think it's worth tracking is the amount of resources you invest in the professional development and talent management of your team. Next slide. Daniel, I think this is you.
Thank you, Tom. So we talked about the 3 steps here to succession plan, and we're looking for your feedback. We want to see if any attendee today has utilized any of these steps to prepare for succession planning. Have you developed risk matrices based on position grouping, priority, what's important to your employees, and categorize them based on total risk? What about assessing morale and culture to build that trust and buy-in? And as Tom discussed, developing the pre and post measurables to help shape your organization and increase the buy-in and have a successful and strong succession plan, and looking at how your organization will define the success and validate that. So please take a moment, drop it into the chat or the Q&A box. We can discuss it further.
Well, that's happening. I want to add that this is more important than ever with the still ongoing recovery from COVID and the impacts of remote work on organizations. We are bringing people back to the office 3 days, in some cases 4 days now, and it can be very, very fitful, re-engaging people with the workplace, and that's a huge contributor to morale.
Excellent, Corey. And what feedback or lessons learned do you have after completing the steps 2 and 3? What worked or didn't work for your organization? If you don't mind dropping that in the chat. Or if you want, you can come online too, whatever's most comfortable for you.
And Brian's got a great question, Daniel.
Yeah, I think Brian's questions are about the constraints. I'll add, and I'll let Daniel comment because he's within the state DOT. But I know that our collective bargaining agreements do allow us to identify leads and to promote within classification, so that we are able to provide some additional compensation for people who agree to take on additional work within their organization. When new positions open, that demonstration of initiative, I think, makes them more competitive to compete for a job outside of their classification, and equipping them with the tools that that allow them to be competitive on the job for you. But I'm okay accepting the fact that in some cases we train people who are going to be going elsewhere, as long as we can anticipate it. But I think the organization as a whole benefits from the fact that we're able to do sessions on. Recently, we've done training on effective uses of artificial intelligence in the workplace. So we have ChatGPT and Copilot available to us, and so we've done training on that. We've made access to futurist training, so how to think and anticipate the future through what we would call STEEP analysis, which is looking at the social, technological, environmental, economic, and political changes, so you can anticipate the impact to your job of external and internal forces. So those are the types of things that we try to do to keep the workforce engaged, even though we can't offer raises all the time. It's just figuring out how we can build the individual. And sometimes we win, sometimes we lose.
Ryan asked a really tough question, and where Caltrans is faced by a very similar constraint, which is sometimes positions are just limited, and there may not be much more upward mobility. And we'll talk a little bit about that next week with cross training and finding out and tuning in. Does anybody else here tune into with FM? What's in it for me? So sometimes you just need to have that one-on-one and talk about what the employee's interested in and try and delegate work towards that. At the very minimum, it will keep the employee motivated and challenged, as it's a new task within the work that they're currently performing. But you're absolutely right, Brian. We are constrained oftentimes by the increase in wages, especially at the government level. And thank you again, Corey. Employees seem to give good feedback, most of which we could implement. We did a little too much on the measurables and are having to reevaluate the concept. Excellent. So that was excellent that you were able to implement those. And let's see here. We had one other comment here. We have implemented working Gs. Oh, excellent. To help build morale and working as a team, but I not feel the succession plan portion has seen the same investments. And we'll talk more about that as well next week and maybe a little bit in just a couple minutes here. We've done part of number one.
Brian,
Not sure if it's. Go ahead.
I was just going to have one other comment for Brian. If the organization can revisit the position descriptions that have been used for all the years that you talk about, and we were in the same position, it may result in the creation of some new opportunities that will allow you to plan for succession in mind. Our most recent review of position descriptions created a whole new suite of social media, communications, and technology-based position descriptions that are going to have a positive impact on future hiring.
And that's excellent, Jenny. I definitely recommend going that route as well to build what we call basically desk procedures to help capture the SOPs, standard operating procedures in the organization, which will help reduce or mitigate some of the gap of those areas that are at high risk. So excellent responses and feedback, everybody. Let's go to slide 13, please. So the goal for the plan is, again, to build that trust and maximize employee buy-in. There's going to be data collection, but it's not the end goal. I think one of the attendees here just commented on that and stated, I'm trying to locate the name here. Thank you, Corey. Corey had provided that the data collection was a little much, so we need to be careful not to dive too far into the data as we need to make sure that it's going to be utilized. Again, our end goal is just to maximize the trust and the buy-in and to help improve the morale and culture. As Tom had talked about earlier, let's share the plan feedback between the organization, department, at least at a minimum division wide. We need to really gain that trust and accountability to improve the morale and again, maximize the buy-in. I told you to be saying that a lot today. Share the outcome of the plan, share where you are in the steps, and what's your strategy for getting to remember everybody's involved. And provide periodic updates as the planning is finalized. Again, let's refocus on this. The goal is transparency. It's going to improve buy-in and the trust for everybody who's going to be participating, which should be everyone. Move on to the last slide, please, Patrick. So I'll go ahead and talk about the first bullet and then pass it off to Tom here. So make sure that when you do develop the resources that you keep the succession planning team accountable. Provide expectations in the role. You can update duty statements. I've done that in the past with my employees, and I've provided that out to our divisional leadership here. It seems to be successful. Make sure mentoring is included, training, setting aside time to answer questions, determining employee interest in leadership. Remember, you don't have to survey out who's interested in that pool if you already know. If you already know who's in that pool, it's going to be so much easier to determine those individuals who want that opportunity to promote. Make sure at least 5%. I'd go to a ceiling of 10%. We all have our duties here to cover within our organizations of time and resources that are dedicated to succession planning to make sure you stay within that vision to reach those goals. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to add is, right, so securing resources, dedicating resources to succession planning is incredibly important to be able to make sure that people have time to document the process and to implement the outcomes. I want to make one last comment, though, that while we have, I think, correctly stated that everybody is responsible in bringing this into the culture of the organization through the individual on a regular basis is essential for the success of knowledge management development and therefore succession planning. I want to make a pitch for not neglecting the needs of leadership in training. And sometimes they, sort of think you get to a particular level, you don't need to reinvest in training at that level. But turnover at the administration level, again, the research will tell you this, will have dramatic impact on the capacity to do the succession planning in the first place. So there's a lot of new literature on effective leadership training. And the tools that are now being injected into those trainings include change commitment, risk acceptance, to Daniel's earlier point, conflict management, self-development, right? The futurist thinking I talked about, organizational awareness and communications and relationship building. So the resources need to be deployed at the level because you can't have effective talent management and development in an organization if the leadership itself doesn't take its own development seriously. And then the last slide is the summary, Daniel. Hand it up to you.
Thanks, Tom. So again, everybody is responsible for succession planning. Coming on down from the executives at the champion level, your divisional department leads, as the leaders, human resources to assist with gathering the resources and being the technical experts and where everything is housed, and also the employees who are going to help validate and provide suggestions to improve succession planning. We have the 3 steps for succession planning, which is create a risk matrix to help you chart what areas to focus on. We also have the assessing morale and culture to make sure that everybody has the maximum amount of trust and buy-in to engage in the succession planning, and then also setting the pre and post measurables to validate that we've been successful. We want to make sure everybody is set up for success by having the right criteria in there and measurements in there. And then, of course, budget the resources. Make sure everybody's dedicated at least 5% towards succession planning. You can put it into duty statements. Heck, you can even put it into job advertisements if you want to. That might encourage people like, hey, this is a great career opportunity. Hey, they're going to take care of me. They're going to succession plan. They want to see me succeed. And as Tom mentioned as well, make sure your leadership has that training to make sure they continue to develop and not just be stuck in their old ways because it's always what they've done and they haven't had the opportunity to train and learn new things. Anything else you want to add to that, Tom?
No, I think that's it. And unless there are any last minute questions people want to share or comments people want to share. Of course, you can reach us offline as well. So Scott, any reminders about next week's session?
I'll be sure to actually send out a reminder email so that everybody's got a link and a reminder to join us next Tuesday.
Thank you for everyone who's joining us today. I recognize many names from last week, so we're thrilled that you're back with us for part two on the California LTAP and Division of Local Assistance and Sacramento chapter of the American Public Works Association presentation on succession planning. Last week, the focus was on planning to plan. This week, the focus is on implementing the succession plan. And like last week, we're going to be building upon some work that was done at California State University, Long Beach, with funding from the University Transportation Center program, which is a U.S. Department of Transportation program, and again, funded through the Pacific Southwest Regional University Transportation Center program, that looked at how you build succession planning capacity within a state DOT, but Caltrans in particular. And the approach we took was doing a national scan of efforts at other state DOTs to see to what extent succession planning took place at all, and if so, where that effort was housed, who was responsible, and how the findings were used. That led to a series of engagements with some peer state DOTs, culminating in a focus group that resulted in some really valuable information sharing, the development of best practices, and all of that found their way into the report that's on the that's here on the screen, and that we can certainly share a link to as a resource. What we're going to focus on today is sort of recapping a little bit of what we talked about last week, and then moving into some implementation steps that came out of the work that we did, including Caltrans' own efforts to develop a knowledge transfer guidebook, and you'll be hearing more about that. But with that, I want to turn it over to Daniel Burke from the Division of Local Assistance at Caltrans to help us begin a recap of what we talked about last week for those of you who couldn't join us and those of you who did. Daniel.
Thank you so much, Tom. Yeah, just as Tom was talking about, we're just going to cover a quick recap here from last week's planning to succession plan. One of the groups that we want to target, demographics, is 35 to 49-year-olds. These are going to be your future leaders. So we want to make sure that the succession plan is targeting these individuals as they are the future of your organizations and your government agencies. We also want to make sure that we're engaging the under 35-year-olds to see if they're interested in joining a leadership pool. This is a lot easier than asking for individuals who may be interested in leadership, is perhaps to encourage and have those individuals step forward and have them let you know that they're interested in the leadership versus trying to recruit them actively. Again, if you start early, it's going to be a lot less work to have them move and mobilize into that leadership positions. We also want to make sure that leadership is able to manage through change. Demographics change over time, even throughout the organization. Right now, I believe we have about 4 demographics. Currently, we have the baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, and Generation Z. They all have different wants and needs as a generalization. Not everybody's the same, but we need to make sure that they are able to manage through the change and that they are being targeted through the succession plan. There's 3 steps of planning here that we're going to cover in the next few slides. Develop positional risk matrices, assessing morale and culture, and developing pre and post measurables. I'm going to turn things over to Tom again to talk about positional risk matrices. Tom.
One of the things that came out loud and clear from the review of what state DOTs do and what's considered a best practice is making sure that succession planning doesn't happen in reaction to somebody leaving the organization. It isn't focused solely on a single position, but it's institutionalized in a way so that all of the positions that are needed for the organization to be successful are assessed at the same time and regularly. So we talked a little bit last week about positional risk matrices, and what you see on your screen is an approach that was taken by the Montana DOT, which they referred to as a critical role identification. And this is part of the regular succession planning process that occurs there, and it focuses on a couple of key things in particular. What is the urgency of need of both the position that we have and the skill sets that are embodied in that position? And what would be the impact of a loss in those skills? Do we have somebody immediately available to step in to perform the job function in whole or in part? Or have we identified talent that's external to the organization that could be brought in if needed? Part of this process is regularly looking at the changing needs of the organization and whether the skill set matches. This, for example, would be needed in response to how artificial intelligence, right, is impacting all functions of the state DOT, from planning to engineering to the HR function. Do we have people who do effective prompt engineering, for example, and how do we anticipate the need for that and respond through the professional development process? And part of that is having employees help define and do essentially what's a gut check on the work that they're doing to see whether they're equipped, and how the organization responds if you find gaps in the knowledge that's needed to perform the role as it is now. Next slide. I think this is you, Daniel.
So the second step was to assess morale and culture. And 2 of the things we talked about last time was trust and buy-in. We need to make sure that the morale and culture is relatively high within the organization. This will help us to build trust and to embrace the change. If employees do not have the trust, there is no rationalization for them to buy in. We can accomplish this through either required surveys. We have that within our organization that seems to work. Or if that doesn't work so well in your organization, you can try one-on-one interviews. Look for the keywords that are going to come up through asking open-ended questions. Those keywords are going to help you identify those areas that your organization needs to work on and improve to continue to increase morale and build that culture and trust so your buy-in is maximized. Go ahead for pre and post measurables, Tom.
Yeah, so the other thing that we talked about last week was the need to develop the equivalent of key performance indicators for the organization at both the pre-succession planning and the post-succession planning stage. Daniel mentioned the fact that surveys help gather the baseline for your organization, one-on-one interviews, and incorporating them and institutionalizing them into the employee engagement process will help you, right? And I think this point here about setting a goal to exceed the industry morale minimum of 66% is interesting because a couple of points here. One is that the work that we did with other DOTs revealed the fact that while departments of transportation, the public sector in general, has become pretty adept at identifying performance measures for the projects it develops, right? For the performance of a highway system or a road system, they lag the private sector in identifying key performance indicators for the agency or organization as a whole. So looking to what benchmarks are set outside of industry is a good check of how you're performing. And then making sure that the pre and post measurables are part of a continuous loop of assessment. You want to make sure that your post measurables are checking the pre measurables that you've set. And if you need to develop or change the measurables because of what you are not capturing, perhaps, you need to be able to do that and be flexible enough to do that. The measurables have to be applied both at the unit level and at the entire organization level to reflect the health and well-being. A successful unit, an innovative unit within a dysfunctional organization doesn't do you any good. And when you have data that comes out of your assessment, make sure that you have tools that you can respond to, whether it's investment in additional training to fill in some of those gaps, or modifications perhaps in the recruitment process that allow you to build in the talent, a talent bench. And that's that point of institutionalizing. Next slide. One of the other things we talked about last week was the need to make sure that we're developing measurables both for the individual employee as well as for the organization itself. Very often, one of the lessons that came out of the research with the other DOTs is that for those DOTs that tied the succession planning to the performance review process, were less successful than those that built a parallel process looking at individual development plans for the employee that were focused on identifying needs for personal and professional development that made them more effective for the organization, but also made them happier as a whole. The performance review process has a negative connotation with it, and any discussion of development potential can be viewed in light of job security, which it is, but in terms of it being connected to a checklist of whether you're meeting goals for the purposes of keeping your job is different than when you're looking to build capacity. It's a nuanced difference, but the fact that the performance review process happens on a cycle and is again viewed by the employee as being one that's focused only on oversight and not professional growth means that separating it out can have positive impacts on the organization. And then also for individual development, regularly reviewing the position description for skills alignment is helpful. And writing the position descriptions in such a way that they're not too detailed at the outset so that you're able to modify and adjust and pivot based upon the needs of the organization. For the organization as a whole, it's figuring out whether you're doing the right things that build that talent bench and prepare for employees to leave the organization either because of retirement or attrition to other organizations of the private sector. That means keeping metrics on things like responses to job applications, right? Are you getting the pool of talent that you expect, or do you need to revisit what the job application says so that it's perhaps less focused on specific degrees and more focused on skill sets, which again I think is something that the private sector has done a little bit ahead of the public sector. Are we keeping high potential employees, right? And those high potential employees are some that come out of the risk assessment using those matrices that we talked about. What is our internal promotion rate through that succession pipeline? Are we looking, and do we need to hire outside of the organization to fill key roles, or have we done a good enough job at promoting internally beyond classification? What's the fill time for new openings? Do we have to repost a position because we don't have enough qualified candidates? That's a good measure. What resources are we committing to professional development? Because if it might be a question of being penny wise and pound foolish in not investing in things that save us money over the longer term. And benchmarking against what are we paying compared to what that same employee might be getting for a similar position on an open market. Recognizing that the public sector, state DOT, may not be paying the same salary, but offers a lot more in terms of benefits, perhaps job security, retirement opportunities, and how do we make sure that potential employees know that that's an option? Next slide.
Thank you, Tom. So again, like we were talking about, let's maximize that trust to maximize that buy-in. So let's increase the morale to increase the buy-in to the succession planning so that employees can rationalize their participation and have an opportunity to know that they can grow within your organization. Be transparent and update your teams often about the succession planning and where you are in the status. That helps to build trust as well. And like Tom's team did with the succession planning study, they benchmark against peers in government. Some governments do succession planning better than others, and they may even have better tips for doing them. So don't be afraid to benchmark, with your peers in a government or your organization, such as a consulting firm. Make sure you assemble a good team to start developing the succession planning, and make sure they're also feeding through the updates, the transparency, where they are in the status of developing the succession plan. That's going to help the organization be excited about it, about this opportunity that's going to be coming up for other skills, promotional opportunities, what we can do to ensure the success of the organization. Make sure we hold everybody accountable. Everybody's going to be participating in the succession planning, from the rank and file or your standard technical working employees as the participants and validators, all the way up to the C-suite level, your executives, your director's office. They are going to be the champions of the program. So everybody in between is accountable to make sure that the succession planning is, well, a success. Next slide, please, Patrick.
So one of the things that we learned through all of this, right, is the need to, as I said, institutionalize knowledge transfer in a way internally that allows an organization to do effective succession planning. So when I talk about knowledge transfer, right, it's a component of succession planning. It's an input to making effective succession planning decisions. In an organization the size of Caltrans, but I think this is the case with any DOT, you have different job functions which are easily siloed. The problems are more acute in an organization like Caltrans, which is spread out over multiple districts across the state with a headquarters division and 20,000 or so employees. The need to document how knowledge transfer occurs at the division level or the department level is really important, because it's only then that can you scale up. You can learn from what's being done effectively, and then have a set of tools that are available to all of the divisions that they can use to transfer knowledge internally. And then at the succession planning stage for the organization and leadership, they know what has worked effectively at the levels, whether it's transportation planning, whether it's freight systems, whatever it might be. So the Caltrans Knowledge Transfer Guidebook was something that we looked at assessing through the research that we did to try to understand what part it played in succession planning, how effective it was within Caltrans, and what changes might be made to make it an even more powerful tool. And this is another link I think that we'll be able to share with you. But the purpose of the Knowledge Transfer Guidebook was designed to capture and transfer critical skills and knowledge from experienced employees to their successors. And so this was an idea about what tools can you use to document it so that it becomes a resource. It discussed different ways knowledge can be stored and transferred, and that storage of that knowledge is really important so that there's some level of standardization, that it's accessible to everyone and you don't have to go searching for it. And then the idea that it looks at whether knowledge is itself tacit or explicit, right? Whether it's based upon sort of the discipline and the skill sets you bring from an educational program to the table, or whether it's things you learn on the job and that make you more effective outside of your discipline, whether it's communications, strategy, knowledge of systems, whatever it might be. The Knowledge Transfer Guidebooks uses a 5-step process that is a continuous loop of planning, analyzing, developing, implementing, and evaluating. This is not a surprise. Where the succession planning comes in is a component of that development piece, right? So you develop the plan after analyzing the input that you get from the transfer process itself and looking at the tools that are being used. The succession planning, the outcome of the succession planning helps to feed your implementation strategies, not only for knowledge transfer, but for the succession planning tools that you build. And then again, then you evaluate it on a regular basis to see what needs to be changed. Next slide.
Thank you, Tom, for introducing the guidebook, which was a part of the succession planning study. So we talked about the importance of the succession planning guidebook. Here's kind of a sample on the creation of the planning guidebook. So make sure employees, as we've iterated before, keep employees and management informed on the progress, be as transparent as possible, generate that interest and excitement about the succession planning. Update it annually and set milestone reminders. The guidebook should not be thought of as a snapshot in time. It's a moving target. Demographics change, people change. You might have tools that work for one organization, but not yours, perhaps. And that's why it's important to update it on an annual basis and to change and update those tools to meet the needs of your organization. I have a list of milestones here to have publications updated every January 1st. This might work for your organization, it might not. Feel free to use this and then adjust it as needed. September 15th is about the time to edit and update the guidebook. Have updates reviewed by the development committee. They may have some changes or thoughts on what was put into there. And then a second level review by management, making sure that they'll be able to support it once it's published. Once all of those edits are incorporated in by about December 31st, you'll be able to be put in a position to set and publish the updated guidebook for the new year. Again, this is just a sample milestone. Feel free to update it as needed. Ensure the guidebook is easily accessible. We want to make sure that employees have easy access. Management has easy access. Upload it to a shared drive. You could even upload it to an intranet site. Encourage employees to save it to the desktop. These employees, and we'll talk about this more as we're moving along here, but we will be training based upon it a couple of times a year. So at least biannual trainings that incorporate the guidebook into the training exercises for succession planning and those opportunities to promote, such as supervisory skills. Where are you going to find this information? Well, look, it's in the guidebook. So we want to continue to use it as a reference. Next slide, please, Patrick.
Daniel, I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
Is the timing, those milestones, tied in any way to a calendar year or a fiscal year, and does that matter?
I think it absolutely matters for what's going to work for that organization. Things might slow down for us or various divisions by the end of the calendar year, so that might be a good time to update it. We do have a lot of, how would you say, a lot of busy time towards the end of the fiscal year with our accounting books. The state is on a July to June 30th type of fiscal year, where we may not be able to parse out enough time to really develop and really do an effective job of updating that change book. We have projects that need to be authorized, allocated, etc. So for us, a June 30th, a July 1st update, annual update would not be as effective or work as effectively as January 1st, which is traditionally our better time for trainings and updates. But good question. Thank you, Tom. Let's go ahead and continue on with some of the other observations that were included in the succession planning study. One of the other ones that was included in there was boot camps. This is effective for large organizations and works best when instructors are experienced leaders in their field. Instructors will have an idea of what that knowledge they'll need to pass on to those individuals who are starting to put into those leadership pools. What skill sets, how they're going to need to think and conceptualize about ideas to move forward and maximize the efficiency of the succession plan. Boot camps are an easy way to reach a large audience at the same time, but oftentimes one-on-one maximize effectiveness. And if you can incorporate both by having perhaps breakout rooms or sessions where it's just one-on-one time with the meeting trainer or instructor, or perhaps outside of classroom time would be best too, or outside of the boot camp itself as a follow-up. Now, best practice meetings is one that I've used very recently. We had a meeting with another division in Caltrans, as Tom had mentioned, is a huge organization. We're almost up to 20,000 individuals strong here. We needed to find a way to standardize processes and procedures as we were working across another division that we work occasionally with, but not all the time. And lo and behold, we did some research and found out that there was a flowchart of how to perform this process where we had been emailing each other for weeks upon weeks, phone calls, a couple of meetings. We all looked at it together like, this actually works. We just skipped a step in here. And so we just reminded ourselves, hey, let's not skip that step. And we have the standard process and procedure in place. It could have all been done away with, well, at least most of it, by looking and using flowcharts and making those processes and procedures a little more visible and transparent. This also makes it easier for new hires when you incorporate those best practices into desk procedures. One thing we also are going to be talking about today as well is reducing that learning curve. And here's an opportunity for you to put it in the chat. For Caltrans, I would say in most of the positions that I've been in, it takes about a year for us to have a good idea of what we're doing in our positions. For your organizations or agencies, about how long does that learning curve take? Not where you're at the journey level, but where you have a good idea of what you're doing. Feel free to drop it into the chat. You can go ahead. I'll go ahead and continue on with the presentation. 2 years, that's quite a lengthy time. 1 to 2 years, okay. Yeah, so we can see the importance of cutting down on that learning curve. And that's going to help with the succession planning and also help employees not be too intimidated. Another effective tool that came out of the study was cross-training combined with job shadowing. So we do this very well in 2 of our districts, District 8 in Riverside, San Bernardino, and District 11 in San Diego. Holy smokes, 3 years, that's a lot. And it can be very effective, especially when you have a lot of vacancies in one division or office. It helps with absences, vacancies. Maybe someone's, taking a vacation or has medical leave. That's going to help out to backfill knowing that you have somebody there who is cross-trained. And you also need to make sure that you have some sort of a senior level individual, whether they're a mentor or not, to help the person coming over to your side of the organization to cross-train them. Next slide, please, Patrick. Structured on the job training is also going to be another big help, which was also observed from the study. We want to encourage employees to walk by the fire, not throw them in it. We'll make sure that there's modules and orientation in place to help those employees learn the job faster. And again, cut down, chop that learning curve down to help integrate employees into your organization. We see it works most effectively when it's a standard practice for new hires. And again, it also allows for cross-unit integration, which we just discussed. Job rotation programs has worked well, as I explained, for Caltrans, where they go through various divisions. I've been in Caltrans for a little over 17 years now. That's quite a bit of time. They recruited me right out of elementary school. And I still don't know the organization that well. There's so many silos between the division of transportation planning, local assistance, maintenance, project management. It really helps individuals have a better idea. And if they can't promote within your individual office or division, maybe they can promote somewhere else. So if you're in capital improvements, maybe somebody else can promote perhaps in maintenance or into the water services area of your organization or parks and recs. Remember, these are your future leaders. They're the ones we're recruiting to be your all-stars. Let's give them a chance to shine. And again, we like to see that this is an ideal place for new hires to incorporate into the orientation and those types of modules. It helps them start getting a feel for the organization, how things work in the big picture, and developing that journey level expertise throughout their career. And this is really beneficial for larger organizations as well. I'm getting a little tired of talking. Let's see if we have any questions from the audience. You can go to the next slide, please, Patrick. Oh,
Daniel,
I'm sorry.
while we're looking to see if we have any questions, I wanted to add one thing if I could.
Go ahead, Tom.
One of the lessons, both in the review of the guidebook and what other state DOCs are doing and what Caltrans is doing, is that you do have to address that explicit versus tacit knowledge difference intentionally, right? Some of these tools are much more effective with the handoff of knowledge that's explicit and discipline driven. So the desk manual, right, is a good tool for that. But some of the tacit knowledge really depends upon that coaching, that mentoring, those best practices, lunches that Daniel just mentioned. So you want to think about how your toolkit is big enough without being unwieldy so that you're able to draw upon lessons to meet the needs of what the type of knowledge it is.
Thank you for adding that. I jumped the gun here, Tom, a little bit here. With our next slide is going to be a pause for questions. But I also want to talk about a bonus feature that we have for you today. This was not included in the state DOT study, but like every other organization, and I can tell that everybody here attending is in the same boat as us, where you want to continuously self-improve and look for new ideas. We saw one come across our emails recently, the CALTAP team and I, about psychological safety. Does anybody recall that big event that happened about 5.5, 6 years ago? That big change in the social structure in our organizations? Drop it in the chat or shout it out.
Did we have to mask up, Daniel?
I think that was right. We were put on voluntary lockdown or the pandemic. Good for you, Jillian. It's still fresh in our minds. And unfortunately, it's fresh for some of the employees out there too. For some of us that, just joined the workforce or that just came into your organizations about 5 or 6 years ago when we had COVID, we basically went into a remote mode where we weren't interacting. The Wisconsin DOT, in response to that and other trends that they were witnessing within their organization, said, you know what, we need to focus on psychological safety. Now, this doesn't mean that we're coddling employees and getting them a warm cup of hot chocolate, although that certainly would help for me. I mean, who doesn't like being coddled and a hot cup of hot chocolate? But what it really means is, are we comfortable with where we're working? And are our management and supervisors making the employees as comfortable as they can be? With us talking about the pandemic earlier, we have a bunch of employees who had to work a little more intrinsically and weren't dealing with the public as much. But the problem is we're in a service-oriented organization here. Even for most of our attendees, looking at where some of you have worked and those that I know who are attending, we all work in service-oriented organizations, and we're going to have to deal with people. So we need to make sure that people are providing resources and time in meetings internally. They're good to engage with the public. That's what they're going to eventually have to do. You're providing a service. And that for those who recently have transitioned into a supervisor, can make sure that their employees are still continuing to do the work, even though we're now transitioning into maybe 2 days back to the office or 4 days. We still have to manage those when they're away from the office. And that can be quite a struggle for those employees who just started to go into the supervisor or management track right into the spring of 2020. And so the Wisconsin DOT put in 4 parts here to continue discussion, developing strategies. And one of the takes that I liked out of their plan was they want to implement one action item at a time and measure the success. The thing I really like about that is if it's not working for you or for your organization, you just toss it out. Don't waste your precious resources anymore on that particular action item. Continue to focus on those that are helping your organization and maybe look for others.
Well, one thing that I might add with this, there's grant funding available to mental health organizations to do mental health first aid. And you may want to reach out to your healthcare community, your departments of health at the county level where you work, to see if they have programs in place. We actually did a mental health first aid training at the university that was free of charge to us because it was coordinated through a Department of Health grant. So you may want to look at the partnerships that you have outside of the organization to see if it's something that you can bring in-house without adding as a cost to you.
That being said, we'll pause here for any questions on the next slide. While we do that, I'm going to go ahead and drop one of those organizations here into the chat.
And that was, in fact, the organization that funded our training.
Excellent. Let's go ahead and
Thank you for the question, Daniel. What's a good way to get a short timer interested in knowledge transfer?
We'll talk about that in a couple minutes. Great question, Nikki. But I assume you're talking about a retired annuitant or perhaps somebody who wants to go part-time. So we'll dive into that here in a couple of slides. But if I didn't answer,
or maybe I was saying, Nikki, maybe for clarification, are you talking about someone who has a short tenure at an organization, like relatively new to the organization?
Yes, leaving in 3 years or less.
Yeah. So we are going to be talking about that, but one of the things is developing a transitional training scheme. So we'll be talking about that, but it's a great question. So there were a couple of other things that we wanted to highlight, and this gets to the other end of, I think, Nikki's question, which is how do you illuminate career pathways for younger workers? One of the challenges with younger generational entrants to the workplace is that they may not understand their career pathway as one that's from hire to retire, right? In a world where we're still talking about gig economies, people may expect to move more frequently, and in fact they could, but the state DOT may offer an alternative. So making sure that the onboarding process talks about opportunities for promotion, professional development in organizations that are subject to the rules of collective bargaining. This is a harder task, but the organization can look and prepare for in-range promotions, opportunities for people to move within classification when new jobs open, the identification of leads that are allowed within certain job classifications, and then also on a regular basis revisiting the position descriptions so that they match current needs and are classified correctly. I think one of the challenges we've had in the bureaucracy of a state university is that we're using very old job classifications that tie our hands. The other thing that I think is worth considering is how do you facilitate and foster collaboration across other offices and divisions to break down silos and benchmark with each other. This is the case not only within the organization, but across organizations as well. So the type of focus group that we brought together for the research study is something that can be replicated, at other times where you develop a cohort of people in similar positions in neighboring state DOTs. That helps as well. And you sort of you stop looking at your navel, so to speak, and start thinking about what others are doing that might benefit my organization. It shines a spotlight on success stories. I'd also make a pitch where allowed for participation at all levels in organizations and associations where this collaboration can occur. A lot of the work that many of you who are in state DOTs know about the work of AASHTO, and they've got working groups, and many of the AASHTO groups collaborate through the Transportation Research Board, and it doesn't cost anything to become a friend of a committee and to get on the email lists and begin to build up your network virtually and take part in virtual meetings, even if you're unable to attend meetings in person as a formal committee member. Next slide. Can also look at training or short videos that look at paths that leaders took. How did they reach each level, and what best practices did they take to get there? This might also be incentive-based, where you actually ask employees to do this on their phone, and for which there is some benefit as being recognized as the pathway leader of the month or something like that, even if you can't identify additional means of compensation to reward an employee. But it's getting this employee involved in both the data gathering and the storytelling, the narrative approach. And then developing a voluntary pool of future leaders. Advertise the work of the organization so that you're building a bench. Focus on career awareness to the extent that DOTs can be participants in advisory boards outside of the organization, including ones with the education sector. We welcome DOT participation, public sector participation in general, because it's valuable insight, but it makes young people aware about the public sector as a pathway and as a career. And then once you identify and get people in your organization, making sure that they're aware of what an ideal candidate looks like and preparing them for advancement internally keeps them motivated and challenges them. Daniel, next.
Thank you, Tom. So here's where we're going to talk about developing a transitional training plan. The Japanese actually started with this concept of you have somebody who's a high-ranking executive or a high-ranking senior manager. What they'll do in the last couple of years before they retire is to move them back down to the working level or technical level. And that provides two concepts. First is it gives somebody younger or somebody else a new opportunity to enter into their position. And then as well, it allows that individual to become a mentor and a trainer at that level. This individual would be developing desk procedures, providing on-the-job training to newer employees to help them become technical experts. And that's what some organizations are doing now in the United States. One of the other ones that I've used is to use retired annuitants or part-time experts. I've actually hired a retired annuitant to help and create and consult on guidebooks. This included a contract management quick reference guide and a grant management quick reference guide. They developed procedures to help guide others internally and externally. So it was a great help. Provided structured on-the-job training for individuals. They have references and links to that type of guidance. And it also provides retirees with the opportunity to contribute, to provide their expert knowledge and assist others to make the organization more effective and efficient. The other nice thing too is it's a little more cost effective with the retired annuitants. There's fewer bureaucratic hurdles and costs involved with hiring somebody to come into a consultant or advisory role. I even see some private organizations doing this and applaud them as well. There's a few consulting firms out here in Sacramento who will normally utilize this tact as well. Next slide, please.
Daniel, one other thing was as we bridge to the next slide about the retired annuitants and the transitional planning. If you do have two people sharing a position at the same time, right, there could be an additional cost. That's a concern of organizations. But prioritizing that, using that risk matrix tool from earlier is one way to identify where, if you're going to invest resources in transitional planning, the positions that need it most. The other thing that's clear when you take a look at the state DOT plans and the knowledge transfer guidebook is the important role that management and leadership plays in building their toolkit so that they're able to address the managing through change. I think I mentioned last week that one key performance indicator of ineffective succession planning is turnover at in the C-suite as well. Because then the not building in a succession plan for leadership trickles down into not having succession plans for the rest of your employees as well. So that involves, right, making sure that expectations are clear for leadership, that they're responsible in part for ensuring that the succession planning occurs at all. That it's built into their in-duty statement, their position description as well, that succession planning is intentional and explicit, and that resources and time is expected to be devoted to it because succession planning is continuous training and learning. This image on this slide is of what I think was probably the most effective story that came out of the study effort looking at the other state DOTs, and it's what Michigan DOT does to infuse succession planning into the culture of the organization, which is sort of the MDOT house, which is built upon a combination of leadership, continuous improvement approaches, and self-assessment. Next slide.
Thank you, Tom. As I've mentioned earlier, make sure that management and leaders can budget at least 5 to 10% of their time, 5% being the floor, to support guidebook and succession planning. At a very minimum, management should be discussing this with their employees during their one-on-one meetings, asking how things are going. As Tom had talked about earlier, you can go over this through the individual development plan, find out where they want to be in a few years, and find out what training is available for them. Encouraging water cooler talks as well. We don't have water coolers so much in our offices anymore. But what it just means is a random 10 to 15 minutes informal check-in with team members on succession planning journey. I remember doing this pre-COVID quite a bit, and I need to pick this skill back up. I used to stop by my employee's desk and just ask how their day was going, if they needed anything, had any ideas for training that they wanted to take, any succession, planning goals, any promotional opportunities they were interested in. And that's a good way to do it, is just stop by and talk with them, have a standing meeting. And this helps to form a relationship between junior and senior employees, but not to the level of micromanaging. It helps build that trust which you need for that success to buy into the succession planning. Next slide, please. As Tom had mentioned as well, let's continue to keep those duty statements and update them to reflect succession planning. This is another tool I've used as well. At a minimum, we have two types of duties here at Caltrans that we use. We use marginal, meaning maybe sometimes you'll be doing this work, and then essential, meaning you're going to be doing this work on the job. As Tom mentioned, make sure the duty statement is updated and that the employees are scheduled, or that they know that they have to attend these trainings, including anything that's rotational. If your organization is going to go ahead and sponsor and use that as a tool for succession planning, on the job training, viewing the succession planning guidebook and learning from that, and encouraging and taking a part in the succession planning of the organization. And also if there's an interest in the voluntary leadership pool. Now at management and leaders, you have a different level where it should be an essential. You're already supervising the employees. This is something you must undertake. And what should be, at least at a minimum, included in the duty statement to support the succession planning is facilitating the training opportunities, making sure that they're taking reviewing the planning guidebook, asking questions if they're interested in the voluntary leadership, and also checking in, whether it's standing meetings or water cooler talks. Just checking with the employees to see how they're doing, what their aspirations are, and completing that annual individual development plan. Did you have anything else to add, Tom?
No,
Okay.
I think I'm good.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure, because we're reaching the summary slide right now. Just cover a few of the things that we talked about today. Make sure to develop and implement a guidebook and continue to update it on a regular basis. As a best practice, we recommend at least once a year. You're going to have change within the organization and changes within the demographics, and you're going to view those tools that may work best for you or might not. Make sure those are updated and incorporated and reviewed by the development team and management. Make sure everybody's accountable, their duty statements are updated, that at a minimum for the employees, the technical workers, that they include at least a 5% on there to utilize the tools that will be provided for them to seek out those promotional opportunities, or to keep them interested in the jobs or learn other traits and skills. Develop best practices. This is just going to help your organization and also cut through on some of that learning curve as well. So if we have a 3-year learning curve, maybe we can get that down to 2. Heck, maybe we can even challenge ourselves and get it down to just over 1. I know it takes a lot. We have some very diverse and complicated jobs and positions here with everybody here attending today, but maybe we can, hopefully with developing some of these best practices, some tools, orientation manuals, and through the guidebook, we can reduce some of those learning curves. And last but not least, let's take what we learned from the study. We learned from other organizations. Let's incorporate some of those tools into what we do within our organizations. I'm going to leave a question here and you can answer it in the chat. How does your organization encourage successful succession planning? And what are some of the challenges, or maybe some of the experiences you've had while incorporating those? We're going to go ahead and go to the last slide here. And you may contact us with any of this information here. And thanks for dropping PowerPoints into the slides, Scott.
Nikki, did Daniel cover your question with a couple of good examples for how to keep short timers engaged? Or did you have a more complicated scenario?
Thumbs up.
Sounds good.
I I do want to acknowledge Patrick Sheweck, who's on here, a member of the CalTap team, but who also contributed on the research side to the development of the report. So thank you. Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, I'm gonna add one challenge here that I had while putting together some of the updates to the duty statements and the training modules for various levels across the organization is just getting the buy-in and having people continuously refer back to them can be a challenge, especially in such a large organization. And I think the way to do that is to have, it's pretty complicated at Caltrans since we're 20,000 people strong, but to encourage the buy-in across the organization, not just within one division.
All right. Does anybody have any last questions, last thoughts? No, we sure appreciate your visiting with us, sharing your time, your lunch time. Hopefully you had a good lunch. We will offer more of these lunch and learns down the road, so just keep in touch and we'll let you know what's coming up.